Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Brew Pub. I'm your host, Michael Camp. We are a safe haven for anyone questioning their faith, ex evangelicals, restless evangelicals who want to address certain doctrines, progressive Christians, church burnouts, spiritual refugees, you name it, the spiritual but not religious. And today we are very lucky to have Karen Schock with us. She's a author and podcaster and a beautiful thinker, as we will learn. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Yay, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. We met in Nashville, Tennessee, at the Choir Publishing Conference. That was a great experience, and Karen's going to share her experiences described in her new book, "Too Much and Not Enough: Sacred Thoughts Said Out Loud." So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We've already gotten to know each other in Nashville a little bit, and also just found out that we have all these connections. And that's one of the reasons why I asked you on the podcast. I mean, we've got some background together with this denomination called Sovereign Grace Ministries, guy named CJ Mahaney, uh, Josh Harris, who is part of the purity culture, and we'll get into all that. But I really love your way of writing and your style, and
Yeah.
also all the things that you came up with when you started talking about how to rebuild faith after deconstructing conservative Christianity, and how it's so much more historical. And I think it's very beautiful the way that you framed it. So um, I'm so glad that you're with us today. So I thought maybe what we could do is start off by just asking you, why did you decide to write this book, and what's your goal in writing this book? Um, Too much and not enough.
Great question. So, always have been since I was little a journal writer, always written in journals, have all these journals, stacks of journals in my basement. And somehow in about 2015, 2016, around in there, I started writing stuff on my Facebook page, actually, like just short lines of here's what I'm thinking, kind of my thought process in things. And at first it was just kind of fun and about the flowery stuff and about, my grandkids and that kind of thing. And there came a time because I have, and as you hear my story, you'll see that I have dealt with anxiety and depression in my life and that kind of thing. Um, in the summer of 2016, when things were getting a little bit, let's say, politically like political
Yes.
upheaval.
Yeah.
I started anxiety and depression became just so like heightened in my life. And
Hmm.
I ended up calling my doctor and saying, I need help. And my doctor just doubled my antidepressant. And it wasn't a very high dose in the first place, and I didn't think it'd be a big deal. But about a week into that, I had an episode of the only time I've ever had it. Woke up one morning, and it was like probably about 11 o'clock. It was almost lunchtime, and I was laying in bed, and I was like, I don't want to live anymore. Like that's it.
Oh, wow.
I'm done. Like, and although I didn't even know how I would do that, and when you read my story, you'll hear I'm a hypochondriac. So like to even think about hurting myself would be crazy. But at the same time, I knew this thought process wasn't right. I called my niece, who is my best friend, called her and I said, I need help. And my husband was at work. She came over, she got me some food. She called my doctor right away and they downed my dose. They said this can happen when you with anxiety meds. And she called her counselor and got me an appointment for the next day. And so I got the help I needed.
Right.
Um, but I wrote about it. About a week later, a couple weeks later, I decided to write about it on my
Right.
Facebook page, and people came out of the woodwork.
Really.
Yeah, just of course, in my DMs, like they weren't going to
Yeah.
share it out loud, maybe on
Right.
Facebook, but like, oh, you're so brave, you're so vulnerable. Thank you for sharing this. I had a fair amount of people saying, like, wow, like I would have never thought not you, like
Yeah. Uh huh.
you know? you're so happy, you're so this, you're
Right.
happy. And also I can't relate to you and I'm sorry, I feel sorry for you. And I'm like, don't feel sorry for me, all these things. But it made me just know like my vulnerability is important. And so I kept writing. And of course, from 2016 through 2022, 23, a lot has happened and I've just kept writing about it.
So, are you saying that the things that we read in your book, some of them you wrote them way back years ago?
Oh yeah. Oh
Wow,
yeah.
wow, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So what happened was I got to know Keith Giles, who is
Yeah,
our publisher with Choir. In 2021, I got into his
square one.
Square one.
Yep.
Yes. So
Mhm.
got in with a group of people who were like-minded, because I really walked this journey of deconstruction pretty alone.
Yeah, we all
Um,
do, right, for a while, yeah.
yeah, like again, like you and I were talking about with sovereign grace, thank God I had the internet and I could get on and see that there were other people that were
Yeah,
questioning leadership,
right,
questioning
right.
small group activities and that kind of stuff. So I knew I wasn't alone in the world, but I felt very alone in my own brain,
Yeah,
like,
right, right.
um,
So
so being in Square One, we had our own private group and I would write there and I got real honest there about questions of hell and just different kind of things like that. And Keith was like, your writing is amazing. You need a podcast.
yeah,
First he started out with putting me on Pathos with a blog.
yeah,
And then probably, I don't know, several months later, it was like, let's do a book. And so at first I handed him like 300 of my just different posts and different things that I had written in the past. He's like, yeah, we're going to need to cut that down.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, what
Let's
exactly do you want to
let's
talk about
edit this
in
a
this
little
one?
bit, right.
Yeah. So
Well,
I
let
actually have book two. I mean,
y
you
you
know,
have another book coming out too?
uh, he keeps asking me about that.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, anyways, the book that you came out with is just amazing, and what I wanted to ask, I mean, what I wanted to do is, just to share a little bit, how what your style is. If you don't mind, I'll read just a part of it because you've got a very unique style.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't know if what you call it, but it sounds like prose poetry or something. I don't know if that's
My
the right
editor
term.
my editor, who was an English teacher and one of my
Yeah.
best friends, she's been an English teacher for 25 years. While she was editing it, she was like, I was like, well, this part. And I was like, this poem, if you want to call it that. And she was like, we're calling it poetry. She's like, you are a
Yeah.
poet. This is poetry. And I'm like, okay, I don't like to, again,
Right, it's yeah, it's the
it
s
feels weird,
it
but
looks like on the page, it looks like poetry and it sounds like it, but you've got a story weaving in there, and it's just amazing how you do it. So, let me just read a small portion, and then, I mean, we'll try to get into how why you started doing that. I think this might be the first chapter, Misfit.
yeah.
It says, okay, I'm not gonna read the whole thing,
Okay.
but, Misfit, too much, not enough, too old, too young, always there, never belonging. Walking into a room, longing to be seen, seen for who I am. Yes, seen and loved for who I am. Except, who really knows me? I don't even know if I know me. I think it all began when I was little, in elementary school. I remember being tossed back and forth between the gifted reading group and the regular reading group. Where did I belong? The teachers couldn't figure it out. I certainly didn't know. Then there's this whole personality thing. I'm an extrovert, except when I'm not. I'm pretty joyful, except when I am ridden with anxiety. I like being with people, except when I get into a public place and want to hide. I write about my struggles. I write the most when I am down. There is healing in it. So people feel sorry for me. They just want to tell me I will be okay. Then they see me in person and I look so normal. I thought you had anxiety. Then when the people who know me in real life read one of my writings, they are just as confused. I would have never guessed you have anxiety. I trust God for so many big things, but I have a hard time with the little stuff. One minute I really care what people think, the next minute I couldn't care less. Cheer coach? Wait, I don't know enough about stunting. Teacher? Nope, I'm only a sub. Homeschool mom? Who let my kids watch Disney. Taught true love waits? Didn't wait. Too serious about God for my classmates in school, not serious enough about God for Christians. Trying to be pretty when I'm really just cute. Too liberal for conservatives, too conservative for liberals, too young to be a grandma, too young to take care of my parents, too young to fear death. I love Jesus. I don't feel like I fit in with his people. I have questions. I don't think he's mad at me for it. I do think I am judged pretty harshly by some of the people for these questions, some of his people for these questions. Maybe that is why I have a heart for fellow misfits. Maybe that's why I can be so easy to talk to. I understand that there are a whole lot of misfits, a whole land of them, maybe. I believe Jesus lived and died for us misfits. There is where my hope lies, in the land of the beloved misfits. So I'll stop there. But anyway, that's a great example of your writing, and it just blows me away because once you get into it, um, it's all the whole book is like that, right? I mean, the whole book is that style, and once you get into it, you track with you. It makes sense. These are thoughts that people have and that people relate to because we have the same kinds of thoughts, you know.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with that style? Is that just the what you how you wrote naturally?
In January of this year, I got officially diagnosed with ADHD. And so
Hmm.
I think that's just part of my
Oh, okay. All right. Right.
ADHD is just like, let's just write thoughts, and yeah, I have, there's no excuse for it. I don't know. That's just the way I write. And
Well,
I
that's great.
love
It's
it.
very effective, and I think people. I know. I've read the reviews, so I know people love it. So if you haven't read the book yet, you'll really enjoy this style. And also, I want to say, um, I relate to you on the depression thing. When
Mm,
I deconstruct it from evangelicalism, when I started, I had this clinical depression too, and I know exactly what you're talking about. You wake up one day and you go, "Why? What is going on? Why is this still around? Why? What?" There's a whole. We could have a whole podcast on that, but
yeah.
I just want to say I totally relate to you, and I'm so glad you found the help that you need. There's so much good help out there, and that's part of the deconstruction and rebuilding process. Is like people like you and me try to help people who are going through that to overcome the trauma, overcome the depression or the anxiety or whatever it is that's accompanying their faith crisis or deconstruction. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and
Um,
just the need to know that they're not alone.
exactly. You're
That's
not alone.
that's what I
Right. This is
that's why I
so common.
yeah.
But I was just thinking right when you were talking before, I was thinking, you know what? I think back at all the suffering that I went through, and right now where I'm like I really love what I'm doing, trying to help other people, and and all the knowledge that I've gained, that you've gained too. I know because I read your book that you've gained. It's just amazing, isn't it? You learn all this stuff and you go, now I feel better because of this, and you get it's like a puzzle that keeps getting formed and makes more sense. Does that make
Oh,
sense to you?
100%. I'm still
Y-
learning
Yeah,
every
you're
day.
still learning, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
right.
Even
So
with Go ahead, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, finish your thought.
Uh, just like in the last week realizing, so I took an Enneagram test.
Uh-huh.
Done anything with the Enneagram test?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I took an Enneagram test, and I've always not known what my number is. I've always been so confused, just like being a misfit, like, I'm happy, but I'm not, like, I'm this and I'm not, and
Mm-hmm.
what I realized was I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. So if anybody knows what that is, it's an enthusiast, it's a person that loves life and wants to have fun. And I can look back on when I was little, when I took this test. I actually paid for a test and took a test last week, I think 2 weeks ago, maybe. And I'm like, oh, I'm a 7, but it says I'm a very unhealthy 7 still.
Mhm.
Like, even with where I'm at
Right.
today, the way I answered the questions, and I'm like,
Right.
yeah, I am, because that 7-ness was so taken from me. That the fun, and that when I look at my childhood and with my parents, and such a fun childhood, and I was a fun person, and then all of a sudden I think I and enthusiastic about things, I started to learn about this God who, I think it was in 2005 maybe is when I first heard John Piper.
Oh,
So
yeah, John Piper. Oh, no.
yeah, and he was speaking at a college, he was speaking at Passion, at a Passion event, and he said that he's telling the story of this older couple who had retired, and they were collecting shells, seashells, like they were living down in Florida and collecting shells. And he's like, "That's a tragedy." I went
He
yesterday.
said that's a tragedy?
Oh yeah, I went yesterday and I
Oh my
looked it up.
gosh.
You can look up John Piper seashell sermon or whatever.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I found it yesterday, and I was
Uh,
I lived for this. Like, because what he said was, "That's a tragedy." And then he said, "What are you going to do? Get to the end of your life and you're in front of God, and you're going to hand your shell collection to God and say,
oh
'Look
my
at my
god.
shell collection.'" And
You gotta be an idiot to I mean, no, yeah.
I
I
jumped on, though, and I was like, "You're right. You're right.
Oh, no. Yeah,
Hold your
right.
shells when
Yeah.
Jesus returns,"
Right,
right?
right.
And so I took everything he said, and then he wrote the book, Don't Waste Your Life. And we read
Yeah.
that book, and we did Bible studies in the churches that we were in.
Yeah, yeah.
And in all of that, I was so serious. I was so enthusiastic and serious about, like, okay, well, let's go. If he says we're going to
Yeah.
go for the nations
No,
and get our heads cut off, then I'm going. I'm in.
you're just like me. I did the same thing, Karen. I call it running down to the deep end of the evangelical pool,
Yes.
finding the highest diving board and diving off.
Yes. Yes. And people didn't understand, like,
Yeah.
that they weren't always on board with me doing this. Like, and so for instance, like my husband, who loved Ohio State football, and everybody in our group who loved Ohio State football, we were living in Columbus at the time, and I would be like, what are we doing? How can we sit here and watch
Yeah.
football
Yeah.
when
Right.
there's the world is burning,
Right.
like, and people are going to hell, and we need to we're
Yeah.
wasting our lives.
No,
and
no, that's very true. Yeah. It's
and so
amazing.
it wasn't that it wasn't ever that, oh, like, now I've just an airhead who's saying, now I've deconstructed. It was like, no, like you said, I jumped in, and then it was like, okay, so John Piper says we need to know theology. And so now we need to know the 5 points of Calvinism. So the church that we were involved in, it was like, well, now we're going to read systematic theology. And I read that, and that's when it all started to that's when it all started to go south for me, because I was like, wait a minute, like, God chooses some and doesn't choose others, and babies are maybe go to hell because God didn't choose them.
Oh my
And
god.
all of
Right.
those things were like, I couldn't reconcile. And I would say to people, like, just as I was serious about, like, if the Bible says we need to, if you want to live, you need to die to yourself. Then the Bible also talks about hell, then we better be getting people in.
Right.
And then I would be like, so a billion years, I would say this to my husband and to anybody who would listen, which most people didn't want to listen. But I'd say a billion years, and then like another billion years, and then another billion
Yeah,
years.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. You're a deep thinker like me. Yeah.
We have to be eternal. And people would
Right.
be like, yeah, I mean, that's what the Bible says. If the Bible
Yeah, I
says,
know. I know.
I'd be, no, think about it. Would you please, somebody think?
Exactly. They right. Now, what you're describing is so common. Yeah, I mean, like, for people like you and me, I mean, I became a missionary to Muslims in Africa. You can't get more radical than that,
You
So,
did. Of
yeah, I lived in Africa for 7 years trying to convert people.
course you
So,
did.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, but you're thinking,
What's the next
"Oh, well,
step?
we have to save people from hell. We have to, be on the cutting edge of living for Jesus, you
Yes.
know, and, you taught me this, so I'm doing it." And that's really what shocked me is that when you start doing it, a lot of people are going like, "Well, wait a minute, you're a little bit too radical here." But it's like, "Wait, but this is the logical conclusion to what you're preaching and teaching."
Exactly.
And so, yeah, and then, just the I think the, other thing that struck me from what you said was you answered my next question, which was, what started you down the road, deconstructing your faith?
Mhm.
And, it seems like, you know, one of the red flags was Calvinism. All of a sudden, when you got into it, right, you're seeing,
Yeah.
wait a minute, that's what they believe, and where do they get this? They claim they get it from the Bible, and all this, but when you really dig a little deeper, it really came out of John Calvin's teaching that does not fit or come from the Bible necessarily. It's twisted. So, yeah, tell us a little bit more of that. I mean, what that was a red flag. What other red flags did you have that you said, okay, I got to start deconstructing? I mean, did you just start deconstructing then, or did you just move down to another church? Get out of the Calvinistic church? What
Oh, no.
happened?
Yeah, so one thing too that I was thinking about just today, and I actually called that same niece that I was talking about earlier because she went through all of that. We all went through, there was a bunch of us who went through all of the same stuff together as far as church stuff.
Yeah,
And she was in Columbus with me. And because we got involved in Passion, the Passion conferences, have you heard of that? Like with Louis Giglio
I've
and the
heard of Louis Giglio, but I've never done a Passion conference.
Okay, so it's for college students and it's amazing.
Okay,
And we started going and I wrote Louis and he wrote me back, like, and that was amazing. And we became friends. And then I became friends with his wife. Like it all cool things. And then that's how we knew about Francis Chan. Was he was a breakout speaker at one of the Passion conferences.
oh, he was okay.
And
All
that's where
right.
John Piper at that Passion conference too, it was the same Passion conference that John Piper stood up and said,
Yeah.
if you are listening to any of the emergent church, you are a sitting duck for
Oh my
false
gosh.
doctrine.
Oh
And
my
we
gosh.
went home and threw away anything Rob Bell, anything Erwin
Yeah.
McManus. We threw
Yeah.
away all of that. So, but Francis,
Oh.
he wasn't emergent, so we could follow him. So we followed him and moved our family from Thornton,
Oh.
Indiana, to Columbus, Ohio.
Oh.
Sold our stuff, and gave away a bunch of our stuff because we moved in with another family. And as we were doing all of that, I remember somebody said, well, don't you want to keep it in case when you move out from with that family, like you have your furniture, don't you want to put it in storage? And we're like, oh no, next stop, Africa. Like
Oh, there you go.
we were on our way.
You're on your
Um,
way. Okay.
yeah, just we had to make a quick stop in Columbus to help Francis Chan with the church plant of his. And then when we got there and we were doing this college ministry, we had college students come and it was awesome. We were also watching a lot of Louis stuff, reading John Piper, but Louis's DVDs would talk about serving the homeless. So we went down, we met these homeless people, we invited them into our house. People like to live with us. We had homeless guys
Mhm.
living with us, and it was
Wow.
dangerous. We had small children,
Yeah.
homeschooling, all that stuff. And people would tell us it was dangerous. But I remember we went to a Passion conference like that same fall, and Louis had us come to the green room. There was two of us couples that he invited down to the green room, and it was Chris Tomlin's band and Matt Redman's band were down there, and Louis and his wife, and we were all praying before it started, the conference, and he introduced us to Matt Redman and Chris Tomlin, to their bands, and said, these are my crazy friends from Columbus, from Francis Chan's church plant. These are my crazy friends. And I told my husband just this morning, when I was looking through your questions and stuff, and it dawned on me, and I'm like, why the heck is he calling us crazy? Just like you
Yeah.
just said, Michael, he told us to do this.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
so you're kidding me? You're not doing it? You think we're crazy? You're
Right.
like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
no, that's that's so true. Yeah, we did that too. I mean, my wife and I took a homeless guy into our house once,
yeah,
and I would go down to the homeless shelter, and I would I would talk to my pastor and say, "Hey, we should start a ministry down there." "Oh, we're not, we're not really, that's not really what our goal is, but you go
Yep,
ahead and do that."
yep,
That's kind of what
oh,
the
yeah,
attitude was. And
yep.
then I got into the pro-life movement that way too. I'd start going
Okay.
out and doing pro-life stuff, but most of my churches, only a few people were doing it. But anyways, uh, that's a very interesting phenomenon. And then you're going on, and then you get into Francis Chan's church. I mean, how did you finally leave evangelicalism? What happened?
Well, that one went wrong because of financial situation within the church and no elders. So just a pastor, good for he's still a friend of ours, but just it went way wrong way fast and devastated all of us because we had moved there to help this. And
This
but
was Francis Chan's church?
it was his worship pastor from Simi Valley. Francis was out in Simi, had moved to Columbus,
Oh, it was
Ohio
a
to start a
church
church.
plant. I
It was
get
a
it.
church
Okay.
plant.
Right.
Yes, Francis came to our
Right.
church plant. We were hanging with him, of
Right. I gotcha.
course,
Yep.
doing big things for God with him.
Yeah.
Um, but it went bad. And so we got out of that one, and then we needed to find a church that was we needed elders. Like, why were
Yeah.
there no elders? We needed
Right.
elders. So we
Yeah.
found it, then we looked up 9 Marks because we were still going to be in the Reformed camp.
Right.
And that's when we found CJ Mahaney.
Oh, okay.
And so the next pastor, he was reading a CJ Mahaney book on humility, and that's what we needed. We just needed a humble pastor. And so we went to that church, and that went even wronger. Like, I have story after story about my anxiety, and my anxiety and depression got bad in this church.
Oh my gosh.
And the pastor there was so authoritarian. He did have elders. They just were yes men,
That's
like,
the problem. Yeah, you say, "Okay, elders will solve the problem," and then they're rubber stamp elders, and it doesn't solve the problem.
doesn't matter, right? Right. And this guy would tell my husband that, and other husbands, that the reason why their wives are struggling with anxiety and depression is because they're not leading well. So then what it would so then what I would do is we'd get in the car, and I would be like, because he said it in front of me, and I like got in the car, and I'm like, okay, you need to lead me. Are you going to lead me? When are you going to step up and lead me? Like,
Right, right. Yeah,
so
yeah, to put
I'm
the
leading
pressure on
him.
him. "Okay, it's your fault now."
Yeah, and I'm leading him to lead
Right,
me. Like,
right,
nothing made sense. He
right,
was,
right.
my poor husband, he was trying. And I had
Yeah.
gifts. I could speak, and they would let me speak to the women and to the children, but I could never speak
No,
to the men.
no, you can't speak to
And
them. Yeah.
so I would tell my husband what to say so he could speak to the men. So and he didn't want to speak. Like, when I spoke at the Awaken conference that you and I just were at, afterwards, my husband was like, that was amazing. Like, to just sit there and watch you do what you do and know that there's freedom for
Yeah,
you.
right, right. Yeah, right. It's amazing when you finally break out of it, it's like, "Oh my gosh,"
Yeah,
why were we why were we demonizing women? What's so terrible about women teaching just like men do? It's just crazy. So, okay, that helps me understand. You got through to, it sounds like you just kind of went from church to church, and something crazy would go off the
right.
rails, and then you go to someone else, and then finally you started deconstructing. I mean, did you just start, uh you know
Next church was Mars Hill, like
oh,
a Mars Hill plant. And
I didn't know that.
not Mars Hill, but Mark Driscoll. It was, yeah, our pastor was friends with Mark Driscoll. It was an Acts 29 church.
Okay, Acts
It
29
was,
church. Okay.
yes, yes, and it was down in the city, and cool things happened there as far as, yeah, ministries that we started and that kind of thing. But um, that's when I would listen to Mark Driscoll, and I'm like, he's a jerk.
Yeah,
And
right.
then John MacArthur, I would listen to him and be like, he's a real big jerk.
Yeah.
And at some point, and at that point, while we were at that church, my dad and mom moved in with us. And my dad was 85, 83 at the time that he moved in, 85 when he passed away of dementia, lived with us, went through hospice. And again, I will tell you, there were so many years in there that even though my parents were good little Methodist people, I thought because they weren't going to the nations and they didn't dive into the deep end,
Right, they weren't. Yeah, they weren't doing it the right way, right?
They
Yeah,
probably weren't even going to the hell that or they
right.
probably were going to the hell that I didn't even know if I believed in.
Yeah,
But if there was one, they were probably going
yeah,
until my dad passed away and he was in hospice. And it was all during that time when I started to get on. It was like 2012, 2013 when I started to see the Sovereign Grace Ministry stuff and the
yeah,
Marsville stuff online. I was like, this is a mess. Everything is a mess. Um,
yeah,
there's
right. So that
there's
what
no
she's
safe
talking,
place.
I'm just, let me interject. What she's talking about is both of those churches had spiritual abuse going on,
Yes.
and people start leaving the church, setting up websites and talking about what was really going on behind the scenes,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, this is what happened to us. These are the
Hmm.
things that were
Yep.
going on with us. I'm not alone in this. And so, and I read Rob Bell. Well, all I did was watch his video of Love Wins.
Yep.
He had made a promotional video and I watched that video and he said, Gandhi is in hell. Really?
Yes. Right. Right. Right.
I have those questions.
Right.
I
Right.
went
Yeah. Right.
I
Exactly.
went to my people and I said, I have those questions. And I remember our oldest daughter looked at me and said, Mom, you're scaring me, because
Yeah.
this is the first time. And I was like, well, listen. And then people were saying, you're letting Rob Bell influence you. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, I'm not. These are my questions. He's just
He
affirming that I
Right,
have.
you already had that question, and he was
Totally.
just saying right, exactly. No, I get it. No, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I just, there was a couple of things that you had said that I wanted to mention, and I forgot what it was. But, no, I relate to all this stuff. You're going from, it's a journey, and then it just like
Mhm.
one thing happens or another, and then you're trying to find some answers, and sometimes in trying to find the answers, you find something worse in conservative Christianity. And other times you do find something, oh, Rob Bell, probably some other people are saying some things. I think I had that same experience when I saw Brennan Manning speak
Yeah.
once. Do you remember him? And so
Yeah.
when I went to Brennan Manning speak, I'm like, man, this is like night and day from what they're teaching at my church. This is
Right.
like totally different message, gospel. I mean, it just blew me away. And it was like, in my heart, I knew what Brennan Manning was saying was right, and what my church was teaching was bullshit,
Yes.
It's
Yes.
so,
Exactly.
right. So, anyways, let's move on to something else. You had a lot to say about purity culture. You were in the true love weight movement. Apparently, you taught
Yeah.
teach people to take a purity pledge or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure did.
well, what is that? What is that culture, and according to your experience, and why do you think it's harmful?
Okay. So we're going to back way up. So this is before any of the John Piper stuff. Okay.
Okay.
So this is right when, well, let me back up even more. When I was growing up, I loved God, but I also loved boys a whole lot.
Yeah.
And
It's pretty
got myself
common.
pretty, oh yeah, I was kind of boy crazy.
I love girls and you love boys, and gay
Yeah,
people love who they want to love that. It's just, yeah, it's just growing up. Yeah.
just growing up. But so we were taught when I was going through, I was Methodist and then got involved with like Youth for Christ and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff,
Right.
evangelical stuff. So I was going to those kind of Bible studies and being taught, you can't have sex, but we weren't taught like don't do the other. I mean, we were taught that the more you do with your boyfriend, the more chances are you're going to have
Right.
sex.
Right. Yep.
But we weren't really taught the purity. It wasn't purity culture time yet. So this was in the late 1900s, 1988. And I ended up getting pregnant, not married, with, and he's my husband now,
Right.
but with our daughter, and we went through it. Me and my husband, my boyfriend, he wasn't my boyfriend, except for I'd broken up with him because he had gone out on me with another girl. And then I found out I was pregnant. So it was all a big mess. And
Hmm.
I knew like God, I felt like God was punishing me. Like,
Hmm.
why aren't my other friends getting pregnant? Well, my other friends were probably on the pill because they like I just wasn't going to be on the pill because I wasn't going to have sex, but then I did
Right.
and I got pregnant. And um Alyssa, our daughter, ended up being the biggest gift there ever was. And Kevin and I talked him into he was Catholic, but I had to talk him into saying the prayer so that I could marry him. And
Yes, right. He has to jump through the evangelical hoops.
yes, yes. And he would say he did. We have a really cool God story. And now when we talk about it, because we believe differently, like he would say that night when he got on his knees and asked Jesus into his heart, that he was really just asking God for a second chance in life.
Yeah,
He just was, and he believed it. Like he believed, okay, now I have a second chance. And
right.
so his whole life changed. And we ended up then getting married after he graduated from college, and our daughter was in the wedding, of course. So there was no telling our kids that we didn't have sex before we were married. It was obvious that we had. And we had this cool story, and people wanted to hear it and they were asking us to tell it at youth groups and at Youth for Christ events. And then they started this True Love Waits thing. This would have been in the 90s. And we started to tell our story. My niece, that same niece, I keep bringing her up, but she was in high school at the time, and she was like, could you start a group at our high school? So we started a True Love Waits group, and we
Oh, I
jumped
see.
way in on this
Mm,
because I had 4 children at the time then, and
mhm.
I wanted them to not do what I had done,
Right, right.
not because it didn't work out, but because of the freaking shame that the Christian,
Yeah. Yeah,
you
you
know,
get you get shamed because of what you did. Yeah. Mhm.
it was more all about the shame that I didn't want my
Yep.
kids to go through. And so then it became Josh Harris. Like because I was homeschooling, we got into Josh Harris and started reading all of those books, and Not Even a Hint. So, and Every Man's Battle, like we were reading all of the books and teaching these kids, our own children, and then all the other kids, like you should not even be thinking about sex. Don't ever
Right,
even think about it. Like you don't kiss, you don't hold hands, you don't have a boyfriend until you're ready to be married.
right.
Don't think about it. Um,
No, it's amazing. So yeah, just as an aside, uh, that the true love waits thing kind
yeah.
of hit when we were on the mission field, so we kind of missed that, and then I started deconstructing in the late '90s. But yeah, but before that, it was always there. I mean, that's what I was taught at the Sovereign Grace Ministry Church. It was called People of Destiny then, but yeah, I had that same view. Yeah, you wait until you get married, and they didn't go as so far to say don't kiss or something like that. That was absurd, but
Mhm.
but but it was the same it was the same principles, you know. So what real made you realize that this is really harmful?
Oh, here's what is that now. So we're, 20, 30 years later, however many years later, yeah, 30, 25 years later, hearing the stories of the girls that we taught that to, and the guilt and the shame that they felt for ever, even like we made it worse. Like what I felt, the guilt and shame that I felt for having sex, we put that on them for even holding the guy's hand. You know,
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, right, 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 right.
and the
Yeah.
guilt that we put on
Now
the
it's even worse. What? I held his hand or I kissed. I mean, now I'm.
right. And then also my
Oh
niece
my
who was in
gosh.
high school, so she graduated in 2000. So she's walking around high school. There's probably 40 girls in this group,
Right.
and they're all walking around with their True Love Waits rings. And she realizes now, what the heck kind of witness is that to people that are, to, like, it didn't come across good, like to the girls who had already had sex, to
Yeah,
the
right.
girls who were
Yeah, well, I screwed up. Yeah, but now right, and if, and then
crying.
I instantly shamed.
Those girls are shamed. And then the
Right.
girls who were wearing the rings, who I would say uh over 90% of them, over 90, like of the people I've talked to, maybe there's one or two that actually waited to have sex
Yeah,
until they were
right,
married.
right.
So
Yeah,
the guilt that was heaped, and the shame and the fear, there was so much, it was so fear driven
right.
and not Jesus driven at
Yeah.
all. Although we would kind of put Jesus in on the end of it and say, now if you say this prayer, you can go to heaven. Um, it was
You
all
can be forgiven and you can do it. Right, right. There's the
it was
forgiveness
all
part too, but it's like the issue though is it's so narrow in the religious codes of conduct. It's just so damn narrow. I mean, and
yes.
and it's not even in the Bible.
Right. We were making this
Who
whole
says you
thing.
can't hold hands and kiss before you get married, or
Well,
or who says even sex before marriage, if you really
right,
deconstruct sexuality in the Bible, it's really not in there either. So
right.
you get it's just crazy. So I get it. It's just amazing how people fall into that thinking this is the right thing, but what they do is they get their they get their focus off of what matters most, which
Right.
is love your neighbor, love people, right? If you just focused on, hey, yeah, it's natural to have relationships to like boys, like girls, whatever, but love people, respect them, don't, right, and yeah, be responsible, right, and
We
but they
weren't
don't
teaching that. No,
they
we
don't
weren't.
you can't they don't want to teach that, right? Right,
No, it
because
was black
the
and white.
love message doesn't have enough boundaries. It can be too broad, and so they want to make it really tight, legalistic, religious codes of conduct boundaries, and it just gets what strikes me. It's got worse. In the 80s when I was uh, the height of my evangelical commitment, it was there, but it wasn't as legalistic as what you just described,
No,
right? So it
absolutely.
just got worse, right?
Right. Yes. It had to, because they had to figure out a way for to not have little Karens that are getting pregnant.
Yeah,
Now we got to take it another step. And then it just that became what your identity was. Like
right.
all of your identity now is in this.
And
What
it's
about this?
controlling. Yeah, it's very controlling, right? They get
Oh,
that's how they solve problems. They could try to control people,
yeah.
right? So, the other thing um, that you talk about in the book is that you were in the Christian homeschool movement and being a homeschool mom. Um, well, what was that like? What was it like being in the evangelical homeschool movement and just taking on that version of motherhood and womanhood, for that matter?
The misfit. I was a misfit.
Right.
I we There wasn't a whole lot of prayer and that kind of thing that went into how we started homeschool when our daughter was 5, like when she went to kindergarten, when she was going to go to kindergarten. Just kind of a thing happened. My older sister was homeschooling in Richmond, Virginia, so she lived in a bigger city. We lived in a small town. But and I'm not, mind you, I'm not sad that I homeschooled. Would I do everything about it differently? Yes, but I loved
Right. No,
having
homeschooling in and of itself is not harmful. It's just
no, but
another
there
way
was
of
so
educating
much
your
harm.
kids. Right.
Yes, but in the way, because if you've seen Shiny Happy People,
Yes, I
have you
have.
seen that movie?
I
Right.
just finished watching it the other day.
Okay, so that was the people that I hung out with.
Bill
So,
Gothard's. Oh my gosh.
yeah,
Did you use Bill Gothard material in your homeschool?
I did not, but the people that I hung out with had gone to one of his, seminars or whatever, and
Right.
they were starting to do that, and they were starting to talk about, "We're gonna start wearing dresses, we're gonna start putting dresses on our
Oh,
girls."
I see. Okay.
But all of the spanking stuff, we did that. Michael, we did that.
We
Like,
did
we
that too. Sovereign Grace
ah,
taught that.
yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Yeah,
You're right.
Larry Tomzak had a book that they would teach at our church. You know what the title was?
What?
God, the Rod, and Your Child's Bod.
Oh my goodness. Well,
No,
I
no.
haven't heard of
One
that book.
one of the biggest things I
Ooh,
regretted was
me
spanking my
too.
kids,
Me too. That will
and
be in my
it
next book.
was
Yeah.
but what astounded me is that we spanked our kids. We thought, a reasonable amount of spanking. There were people that would spank their kids every single day,
All
many
day.
times a day,
All day. Yep.
every day. And
Yes.
I was like, "What the heck?" That
Right.
was a red flag for me. I was like, "That's
Yes.
crazy," you
Yeah.
know?
We didn't do that either. We made spanking an event, but still, I and a wooden spoon, because that's what
Yes,
Dobson and
wooden spoon. We called it Mr. Do Better.
aw, ours didn't have a name.
Our spoon had a name.
But but I did, just like a couple years ago, I told my kids, and they're grown adults now, but I've apologized to them.
Yeah, right. You
In
do,
the
yeah.
in the book, I've done an apology to anyone that I let in True Love Waits. Like, so I'm on an apology tour right now, because I want people to know, like,
That's good.
it wasn't right. But I told my kids, I said, I got rid of all the wooden spoons in my kitchen because I said I went and bought like rubber ones and I got rid of the wooden ones because I don't want you guys to be in our house and see those wooden spoons and they're like,
Right.
"Oh, mom, oh, you're crazy. That's silly, mom." And I'm like, "You know what? Maybe it isn't as much for you
It's for
because
me. Yeah.
as it is for me. Like it's
Right.
triggering for me."
It's triggering. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
Oh,
No,
but I just
absolutely.
knew and I was always felt like a misfit. I said I was a homeschool misfit. Um, I never was that quiet, never had that quietness about me that I was supposed to have. I never had the, you know, up before dawn and all the things about the Proverbs 31
Proverbs
woman.
31 woman.
I just didn't. I wasn't that. And so I
Right.
always carried
Yeah.
that guilt. I had anxiety, so I didn't
Right.
have that peace in my soul. And yeah, I just
No.
remember then when I started to learn John Piper worm theology and there's nothing good in you. Like, I was like,
No,
yeah,
that
I
well,
agree. There's nothing good in me because I'm surely not that. So, yes,
yeah.
you're right. There's
Yeah,
nothing
no.
good.
So that's the other thing is that you talked about worm theology. I
Yeah,
assume you mean the original sin, original depravity doctrine that John Piper teaches and
yeah,
Calvinists. And
yes,
frankly, almost all evangelicals teach that. Even if they're not Calvinists, they teach it
yes,
basically. So, but yeah, I mean, that's another thing. It's very damaging. It's like you're a piece of shit right from the start, right?
right.
And everything's all things considered, everything remains the same. You're going to hell, and it's such a destructive worldview. It's just incredible. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of things in there. But I mean, how did you finally overcome that whole doctrine? That you must have thought that yourself because oh, I have anxiety. Oh, I'm not fitting in. How
Yes,
did you finally
always.
overcome that?
Oh, finally overcome it. I think I'm still
You're
overcoming
still
it.
dealing with it,
I
yeah.
think I'm still in
Well,
therapy.
what makes it easier for you?
Um, to not believe that that's who God is. Like,
Yeah,
to change
right.
my thinking on who God is and um to not listen to those sermons and not go to those churches every week and hear it. And just to, we were taught you don't ever say that you love yourself. Like you don't, or you that you should love yourself. Like that's a horrible thing to say. And so just learning like um it's okay. It's okay to that I am who I am and that
Right,
Christ
accept
is
yourself, yep.
yeah, yeah, and that there's work to do. And so there's work to do for me in my just in my whole life. I part of it when I had the anxiety and depression, and I couldn't get rid of it. I had people that were trying to pray the demons out of me.
Yes, right, right, right.
I
Yep,
I'm on my knees and these strangers are all around me praying the demon of fear out of me. Um, and as that's going on, I really wanted it to work.
yeah,
A
sure.
quick fix would have been great,
Yeah,
like get
not
it
a
out.
quick fix, yeah, let's go for it,
Bye,
man.
bye
Right,
anxiety, bye depression.
right,
But
right.
then realizing, oh wait, maybe some of the anxiety and depression has actually come from the God that I was actually believing in.
Yeah, that's a very interesting that's very key right there. It's actually coming from the
Yeah,
theology that they're teaching you about God. Yeah,
yeah.
right. It's true. No, that's
So
very true. So that finally you finally woke up to that and started changing your view of God, and that really helped, I imagine.
yeah, just learning that um there are different views over the last 2000 years on what hell is like because when you learn I think the coming of the internet has helped so much
Oh yes, it has.
and just like, oh, wait a minute, we're not just in this little church learning what this one man has to say and this one doctrine. Like, oh, wait, I can Google that and I can learn about hell and that, oh, okay, so there's been three different views. There's this
Right.
annihilation view, or there's
Yeah.
this, and all these
Universalism. Yeah.
churches believe it and they
Yeah.
still believe in Jesus. Oh, like, or the rapture theology, like dispensationalism, like just learning that, oh, that happened in 1830, like is when they started believing in that. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Like all those
Yeah.
things one
So
by one, learning that is like, okay, we got some hope here.
right. No, that's what you're describing is the historical part as well as the emotional part. But the historical part, yeah, you learn, okay, if you looked at the history of it, didn't actually the doctrine of hell didn't come from the Old Testament or the New Testament. If you look at the Bible, how they translated words, all this stuff. If you look at original depravity, the early Christians didn't believe that. That was, injected into theology later on, and
Right.
and it doesn't connect. It doesn't even match what Jesus taught in his love ethic. He didn't, he said, "Let the little kids come to me." they're,
Yeah.
they're like God, the kingdom of God. He didn't act like they were depraved, human beings are on their way to hell. He just loved everyone. So it's just crazy.
Right.
And so that's a very key thing. The history of the Bible, these doctrines, uh, the end times thing. When you go back and you realize people had this view of what would happen, but Jesus was talking about the end of the age, not the end of the world.
Right.
And you get into that. All those kinds of things, right, help you heal, right? But
Yes.
but but I mean, was that enough? I mean, what else had to happen before you kind of come around to it? I mean, that's part of it. Was there like just finding other people that believe the same thing and just being reinforced with that?
Yeah. And then just realizing that, yeah, there's a whole world out here
Yeah.
because it was such a bubble, like, and once you get out of the bubble, and I think that's why with the deep end thing, like you said, like I'm out here, I dive into the deep end and then I'm out here and I'm seeing all of this and I'm learning all of this and I'm actually growing and learning, and it's okay out in the deep end, although it's still
Yes.
hard, right?
Yeah.
But then I've got my family and friends who are still out in the shallow and they're like, "No, come on back. Come on back. Why aren't you over here with
Right.
and to try to get them to come to the deep end, it's not happening." Like
Yeah.
they're because they like playing in the shallow,
Right.
like they're happy there. They're fine. Like I'm not going to study hell. I'm not going
Yeah.
to study. And so just to know too, like,
Yeah. Right. They don't want to go there. Right. Yeah.
so they can't argue with me they don't have an argument because they're not studying it. So, and
Right.
that's okay. I don't need them to, because there's this whole world out here. And um, just, yeah, like you said,
It
finding
opens up your
friends.
mind. Right.
Oh,
Y-
the beauty of being able to go to a store and look around at people and think, you're loved by God. You're loved.
Yeah. Right.
I see God in you. Like to
Right.
be able,
No,
like,
no, that you hit on something really important, and that happened to me as well. All of a sudden, you realize, wait a minute, I don't have to divide the world up into us versus them anymore.
yes,
We're all the same. God loves everyone, right?
yeah,
We're not just, oh, you're going to hell and I'm not.
right,
We're not. And your group, oh, if you're liberal, if you're a Democrat, if you're New Age, and then you're really bad, and
right,
and that whole thing can go away, and you just treat people with dignity and respect,
yeah,
and not put them in a box because they're just this. We're all the same. Some people
yeah,
have lost their way and they commit evil acts and they need to be restored. Yeah. And we all need to grow spiritually, right? We're not,
yes,
perfect. So, but we're not fundamentally bad. We are, you know, if we're made in the image of God, everything was good when things got started. He said everything is good.
yeah, yeah, and it's just so fun. Like my life is so, like, I thought if I didn't have this, if I didn't have that way of life, that I would be, because we're taught that, like, you'll be miserable if you get
Yes.
out of this.
Yes.
People who are not, like, they're miserable. And you get out and you're like, oh, wait, this is kind of
That's
fun.
another great point. They teach you that everyone outside is miserable.
Right.
At Sovereign Grace, they used to say, "Oh, the church is supposed to be the happiest place on earth, and everything else is everyone's miserable." And
Right.
then, right. Well, there's miserable people everywhere in the church, outside the church, but there's also really happy people outside the church because they're not being abused spiritually. They're not, they're not being used. They're free.
Yeah. In the one church that we were in before we went with the pastor that was reading Sovereign Grace stuff, when I was having such bad anxiety and depression at that point, and all of it was the church's fault. I would say all of it.
Yeah. Okay.
But I had made an appointment because I had talked to my doctor. My doctor said, let's get you a counseling appointment. He got me a counseling appointment with a Christian man but he wasn't in our church. He was
Okay.
outside of our church. And I was on the phone with our pastor one day and I was like telling him, hey, I have an appointment. It had been like a month since we made the appointment. I said, I have an appointment tomorrow with a counselor and I'm really excited about it. And he said, who are you going to? And I told him the name of him and he's like, so he's not in our church? I'm
Oh
like,
my gosh.
no. And he's like, okay, yeah, we're a family and there are
Oh
counselors inside of our church,
oh, no.
mainly his wife, by the way, there
Oh my
was no
gosh.
way in hell, if
Yeah.
there was no way in
Right.
hell that I was going to go to see her.
Right.
But he was like, no, you need to stay. You need to stay in our church. And so I called my husband and I was like, I think we need to cancel the appointment because
Yeah.
he's like, oh no, we've waited a month and you're going to this guy. And
Right. He
when
was wise. Okay.
he was wise. And you know what? Our pastor wasn't so stupid either because I sat across from Eric, this counselor, for probably 2 months. And by the end of those 2 months, week after week of me sitting there crying, saying, we've already left one church. We can't leave another. We can't be church hoppers. And him looking at me and saying, oh, yes, you can. 2 months later, we were out. We had left
Great.
our pastor, he knew what would happen if we went outside the church. Exactly. He knew it. He knew it. And we did. And of course, though, we went on to a Mars Hill type church, which was really
Well,
hard.
yeah, you weren't finished deconstructing, but you at least
No.
that was a big step. It sounded like, okay, I can at least get counseling outside the church that I'm going to. It's just like, what? How terrible is that? I mean, it's just so silly.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's our whole life now is like, oh, wait, we can go golfing outside of the church and we
right.
can,
Right.
there's all these things that we can do now that we're free to do. Like we kept saying, break every chain, God. I was that person. I have always been that person who's cried out to God and asked God, help me, change me, mold me, make me, all the things, give me
Yes.
a
Oh,
heart
right.
like yours. And I'm like, oh, I get outside of it and it
Yeah.
somehow
Right. I can just be myself and try to be kind and loving to people, and that's all I need. That's it.
and all those things actually are happening. All those things,
Right.
I am being a way more loving person. My anxiety is way more under control. And if I do,
Right.
because I'm okay with it, I'm not thinking it's a demon anymore.
No,
Like,
no, that's I mean, I
right?
had the same experience. I at one point I woke up and I said, I must have a demon. I just can't explain what's going on.
Yeah.
And so then I found some, we didn't call him exorcists, but that's what he was.
No.
It's
Yes.
he was a professor at, I don't know, Gordon Conwell Seminary. And, he thought, oh, I think you just have I don't know what he said, a small demon, or I don't know, oh, this should be easy. And he just said a prayer. And I think you should be delivered. Right. And then after that, things got worse. It's like, okay,
Exactly.
this is not working.
So
But
some must have jumped off of him and into you, and now it
I
got
don't
worse.
know. But what I'm saying, what I'm driving at, and I think you probably have the same experience, is that, anxiety and depression is a real thing, but it can be cured, it can be treated, it can be addressed through cognitive behavioral therapy, for example,
Yes.
through counseling, good counseling, understanding where it comes from. If it comes from the legalistic teachings in your conservative church, well, then get out from under that and it'll probably go away, and deal with the trauma from that and it'll start going away. So
Do a
that's
little yoga, a little
a
evil
little
yoga.
yoga is right.
Very
all
helpful
kinds
for
of
me.
things to help you relax and retrain your brain to think
Mhm.
differently about all these things, because that's what's causing it, the way you think, you know.
Yep.
So yeah, that's great. So I got one final question. We're running out of time, but just where have you landed in your faith? What matters most to you spiritually these days?
I told my sister the other day, we were discussing it, and I just said, I somehow I can't get away from Jesus. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to. Like I'm good. My mom and dad had a simple faith in their Methodist church. And my mom would say that as we were all fighting about theology things in the living room, she'd come out into the living room and say, I'm so glad I'm not smart enough to know what you're all talking about. I just know Jesus loves me. This I know. And that's all I need to know. And then she'd go back in. And my
Yeah.
mom kept that faith until the day she died. And I held
Yeah.
her hand and ushered her in to the arms of Jesus and to the arms of my father. I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure. And that's where I would say my faith has landed. Like it's just this, I know the universe is good. I know that. I know there's good in us. And
Mhm.
I believe in the person of Jesus. And I believe that when I read what he did and said, yeah. Do I know all the ins and outs? No, but I don't
Right.
think anybody does. And I think
Right.
that's okay. I'm okay with that. So
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
that's
No,
where I
and
live.
I've landed in a very similar spot
Yeah.
after doing a lot of historical studies. You go, hey, the love ethic of Jesus is still relevant. And
Yeah.
actually, when you strip away all the mistranslations and all the doctrines that didn't come from him or the earliest follow students,
Yeah.
he's got a very progressive message that we should follow. And
Yeah.
whether you call him the Messiah or something else, there's a very important, valuable, critical love ethic that we can follow, and that can be something that really helps us personally and helps us as a society. But you can do that, in my mind, outside of Christianity.
Absolutely.
That's the key. You get out of the religious system and you
Yeah.
find a way to make it work for you. And you might call yourself a humanist. You might call yourself
Right.
still a Christian. But if you're outside that bubble that we've been talking about,
Yeah.
then there's different ways that you can express that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
So what's the name of your podcast?
It's called the Sacred Thoughts Podcast.
Okay. So
So,
everyone, Karen's got a great new podcast, Sacred Thoughts.
mhm.
And I assume, do you have a website or where do they find that?
Yeah, KarenRuthSchock.com.
Okay, KarenRuthSchock.com. We'll put
Yeah,
that in the notes of this YouTube version and the podcast.
cool.
And they can find your podcast and your book on Amazon. Um,
Yes.
Too Much and Not Enough, Karen Schock. Check it out. It's a great book. A unique style, but it really resonates and is very effective. So, Karen, it's been great to have you on and
You'll
get to
come be
know
on
you
mine,
more.
right?
What's that?
Will you come be on mine at some point?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'll talk about my book.
Yes, that's what I want to talk
Oh,
about.
there
Your
it is
book.
behind me, right there on the shelf. Breaking Bad Faith. Yeah,
Yes.
right, right. So, yeah, that's kind of encapsulates my, where I'm, how what I've rebuilt so far, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
so great. Well, we kind of ran out of time. We could go on for longer, but thank you so much for being on the Spiritual Brew Pub. In the morning we drink coffee, in the evening we drink beer, but so
I
we drink
love
coffee.
that.
So I got to have more evening shows, though. I'm just not enough of them. But
Well, we'll do
uh,
that then. When I
yeah.
interview you,
Oh, there you go.
we'll
Okay,
do that.
cool. Then we can drink beer. Okay,
Okay.
or whatever you want.
Yes.
So great. So thanks again, folks. Stay tuned for the next episode and check out Karen Schock and her book and her podcast. Wonderful conversation with you.
Yeah.
Um, I wish you the best.
You too. Thank you
Okay.
so
All
much.
right. All right, folks. We'll see you next time. Enjoy responsibly.